Welcome to Ceasefire, where civics meets civility and engagement meets empowerment. Ceasefire is hosted by former Boerne ISD trustee and owner of the Boerne Book Shop, Dale Adams, and by former Boerne City Council member and local insurance agent, Ron Cisneros. Ready, aim, ceasefire.
Welcome to Ceasefire. My name is Dale Adams.
I'm Ron Cisneros.
And we're brought to you today by the Boerne Book Shop. And today's show is There Ought Not to Be a Law.
All right. Yeah, in contrast to what we normally say when somebody does something that irks us and we say, oh, there ought to be a law against that, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've been saying that over and over again for 100 years, and look at what we got.
And our elected officials have been listening to us, and they have obliged us with so many laws. Did you know that not even our own government can tell you exactly how many laws they have on the books?
Sounds like infinity.
Yeah, there's no website. There's no, there's a website for Health and Human Services. There's a website for the Treasury Department. There's a website for CMS. There's a website for our national parks. But there is not a website that can tell you how many statutes and regulations we have on the books. That should alarm you.
Not knowing the law is not an excuse.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
They did make sure that one was out there.
There are some guesses out there, and one of the guesses that the number of federal statutes is somewhere around 5,000. And on federal regulations, it's estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
They don't even try to put a number in there. They just give you this vague hundreds of thousands.
Right. Because no single person has actually looked at each department's regulations.
Right.
Only the people in those departments know what's going on.
Which, normally we do book recommendations here towards the end of the show, but I'm going to give you one right now. And this is from a guy named Mike Chase. He's a criminal defense attorney. And he wrote a book called How to Become a Federal Criminal, an illustrated handbook for the aspiring offender. Now,
I don't think I have that book.
Oh,
you'll have to give that to me so I can.
You'll need to find this book. Yeah, this guy went to law school somewhere. I think maybe UConn, and he wrote this book. He actually started a Twitter feed called A Crime a Day to give the aspiring offender an idea of what they could do every day to commit some sort of federal crime. And the purpose of this Twitter feed was to highlight an absurd crime. You and I have talked about this before. We did a show on local
laws and stuff.
Skateboarding down Main Street apparently is illegal. So he did the same thing. He compiled these dumb laws and just dumb regulations. And here are a few of them, and I think these are very interesting. The ubiquitous ham and cheese sandwich, right? The very popular ham and cheese sandwich. I mean, how could that be regulated? Well, the government does regulate it, but by two different agencies. Because you see here, if it was an open-faced sandwich, right, meaning just one slice of bread, then...
Seriously, that's the criteria?
If it's one slice of bread, it's covered by the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture. But if you put another slice of bread on top of that ham and cheese sandwich, it's now governed by the FDA, because the FDA is in charge of bread and the USDA is in charge of ham. So just doubling the bread moves it from one agency in terms of regulation over to another.
Can I put bacon on my ham and cheese sandwich?
I don't know what department that takes you to. I think it's still a free country, but I don't know who's going to regulate that sandwich if you throw bacon on there.
So before I create a new sandwich, I'm going to have to look up and figure out if it's allowed.
Yeah, I wanted to find out about peanut butter and jelly, but I was really afraid because I like peanut butter and jellies, and I don't want to be regulated on those. Here's another one. Mail carrier uniforms. It's originally against the law for anyone other than a postal worker to wear the postal carrier uniform. Now, they changed that to allow actors Apparently the actors got upset, and we wouldn't have Cliff Clavin if we didn't have an actor being able to wear a postal carrier uniform. So they changed the law so that now actors can wear the uniform, make fun of the post office, right? So
there's a law about making fun of the post office.
Yeah. That's why nobody could wear it originally, or one of the reasons why. So and this didn't change until 1967. That was when actors were allowed to wear postal carrier uniforms. And here's the proviso: if the portrayal did not tend to discredit that service.
So we had laws that say you can't discredit some branch of the government. Are those still in effect?
Yeah, you and I cannot wear a postal carrier uniform. That's why when the Spirit Halloween stores open every
they never have postal carriers?
They never have postal carrier uniforms.
Whoa.
Yeah. Now, if you and I
My
claim
son
to be
had a screaming
actors,
fit because he wanted to be a postal carrier.
Did he?
No. But I'm sure there's some child that was traumatized because they couldn't be a postal carrier, which they admired.
Yeah.
Because there aren't any costumes for postal carriers.
Now, we have a mutual friend who's a retired letter carrier, and I'm wondering if he got to keep his uniform or not.
Yeah.
Because I might just ask him if I can borrow it and just wear it and see if I get arrested. So here's another one. Coins. This one's going to surprise you. Without a special license from the U.S. Mint, you cannot export pennies or nickels outside of the country. And you can only travel with up to $5 in pennies or nickels, or up to $25 total in coins in your pocket. If you're found guilty, if you violate this, you can spend up to 5 years in a federal prison.
And that's what all those TSA metal detectors are for.
Yeah.
To count those pennies as we leave.
All those penny... I don't know anybody that travels with $5 a penny. In fact, we're trying to get rid of the penny, right? I mean, it's like, but somewhere somebody figured out a way to take pennies into Canada or Mexico and sell them or something. I don't know what happened, and the federal government said, "Oh my gosh, they're making pennies."
Okay, so there's so much absurdity out there, but let's go back and sort of have more of a discussion.
All right.
So we end up with all these laws. What is the purpose of a law then? Some of these things are just, we don't want you to make fun of postal workers. Well, maybe you shouldn't make fun of postal workers. But they're not something that rises to the level of a law. How do you make that decision that something should be a law or people just shouldn't do it, like a social custom or something like that?
That's a great question. Before I walked in here today, asking myself that same question and thinking about the origins of our country and how we started off with just trying to ascertain what our rights are and then defend those rights. And certainly you start a new country and you start to figure out, well, okay.
I do that every week.
But you think, okay, well, do we need a Navy? And if we need a Navy, who's going to operate it? And then what about a budget? And you start to think about things like, I think that necessitates certain laws. But how do we go from that to deciding who regulates a ham and cheese sandwich?
Yeah.
And I think part of what's to blame is us, right? Not just you and me, but every one of us, because of what we talked about at the intro. You're driving around somewhere and somebody does something that makes you mad and you say, oh, I wish there was a law against that. And our elected officials are more than happy to oblige us and give us those laws. September 1st, we got 750 new laws in the state of Texas. 750 new laws. The state of Texas is not unlike our federal government. They cannot tell you how many laws and regulations they have on the books.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. And yet, our elected officials, most of whom in the state are Republicans, and Republicans are the party of less government. Supposedly, found 750 new laws. And I'm not against all of them. I'm going to tell you, I read about 15 of them because that's all you can get. Because no newspaper or media outlet is going to read all 750 laws to you. That should also scare you, is that we have so many laws. You'll never know more than about 10 in any given year. But somebody somewhere complained, and a state rep said, yeah, well, I'll carry that to the Capitol. And they did, and they got a bunch of other people to say, yeah, we can make that a law. And here we are.
Yeah. I sometimes think we need to go back and we need to have a reevaluation of what laws are and what they're for versus regulations versus social customs versus morality. And I think one big risk that we have run, and I think this has befallen us, is that when you use laws for morality, then that changes the mindset on what makes something moral. Because if you use your laws to enforce morality, you look at the laws and you say, okay, that's what's moral, is what the law is. And if it's against the law, then it's not moral. But if it's not against the law, then it is moral. And I don't think that's really true. So when we have laws that are based on morals, we start to think that the laws are the morals. And then we don't think of the morals as coming from either inside us, which some people think, or from our religious beliefs, or from our social system that we live in. And I think that's a big risk, because laws can be changed on a whim, and they are changed on a whim. And so suddenly, it's not moral to have the wrong kind of ham and cheese sandwich.
Right.
But it is moral to, smear it in somebody's faces, because there's not a law against it. I mean, there probably is, actually, but if there wasn't. So I think there's a big risk that equating morals and laws is a big problem for morals. And I think on that note, we're going to take a quick break. This is Ceasefire with Dale and Ron. We'll be right back. Boerne has its own bookshop. In fact, it's called the Boerne Book Shop. Hi, I'm Dale Adams, inviting you to get lost. Get lost in a good book in our relaxed and casual atmosphere. We have a wide and eclectic selection in the Boerne Book Shop, and we pride ourselves on finding what you're looking for. We do author meet and greets, host writing workshops, and can connect you with a good book club. And your young ones will absolutely love our kids section at the Boerne Book Shop. And while we want you to get lost, we're easy to find, as we're in the heart of Boerne at the back of the Richter Tavern building. We are the Boerne Book Shop. Welcome back to Ceasefire with Dale and Ron. We're talking about there ought to not be a law about some things. And I stopped off talking about laws and morals. And I think the point I was trying to get to is that laws are meant to help us coexist. They're not meant to be our moral barometer.
Right.
And that's what I think people are trying to make them become. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah. I think the other problem with too many laws is that we begin to devalue the laws that we already have.
Right.
So think of when something is scarce, it becomes valuable, right? And when it's no longer scarce, when it's in great abundance, the price comes down. It's just no longer valuable. I used to say a long time ago, I would talk about a woman in a long flowing dress with the slit coming up the leg, right? And it would come up mid-thigh. Now, this
There's
is weird.
There's a law about how high that slit can go.
They're probably so. But that, to me, was always so alluring, so attractive, right? Versus a woman in mini shorts, where everything's exposed. And in today's world, you see flesh everywhere. You see money everywhere. You see abundance everywhere, right? And it becomes meaningless.
Right.
And that's like one of the dangers of pornography, is that you get sucked in and then you find yourself looking for more of it. And with drugs, with anything, any sort of addiction, it just, more is not enough. You can never get enough of it, and that's the danger with too many laws.
Are we addicted to laws?
I think so.
Politicians?
I think so. Right. We are addicted. And case in point, Justice Gorsuch wrote a book himself, Overruled: The Human Toll of Too Much Law. And in his book, he looked back at the number of laws that we have, and in the last decade, just last 10 years, Congress has averaged 344 new laws per session. Now, I want to take you back to 1789, which was the first congressional session on record. And they passed, this is the birth of a nation, mind you, right? Like, we're starting off and we need some new rules to figure things out. And in that first session, they came out with 26 new laws. Right? In their second session, they got a little busier and they had 40 new laws. Now, I invite anybody to go back and look at these sessions. 3 new laws, 10 new laws, 7 new laws, right? Well, in the first 50 years of a country, that's understandable. Yeah. They've stopped keeping track of it. But they do know in the last 10 years that they've averaged 344 every year for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
That's astounding.
Doesn't surprise me, though, because I think you're right. I think we are addicted to laws. When somebody goes to get elected, they say, I will do this. I will promote this law or that law, and this new law is going to help us all and save us all. Honestly, when I listen to an elected official and when I talk to them, I don't do that often, I want to know what laws are they going to get rid of.
Right.
Tell me which of these hundreds of thousands of laws or regulations you're going to get rid of. One thing that wasn't really talked about much that maybe people have forgotten is in the first Trump term, this was done very quietly and nobody paid attention to it on the news much, was that he had a policy in place that for every new regulation you had to get rid of 10.
Right.
Or maybe it was 1 for 1, but he ended up getting rid of 10 for 1.
Right.
But the point was he basically capped the number of regulations and said, we got to bring them down.
In the state of Texas, we have a thing called the Sunset Commission, and after a certain amount of time, an agency comes up for review, and the state can determine whether or not that agency is relevant anymore, and they can shut it down. I think that's a great thing to have, and I've often thought, well, why don't we have that on laws? Why don't we have a law review, and why don't we say, okay, well, for every new law that we enact or new statute or regulation, we have to remove 1. Let's put a cap on the total number of laws that you can have. Right?
Law limits, yeah.
Yeah, a law limit, and so that it all fits in one volume, right? And you can read it.
Without a microfiche machine.
Right. And you know, speaking of the new laws, in the old days, you know, when they create a law on the census, right, you could read it in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have a census every 10 years. Well, in 2001, they passed the No Child Left Behind Act, and that was 600 pages. Do you know anybody that's read that entire act?
Nobody.
Probably there's one person, the person who had to write it, or the people who had to write it.
It was probably done by a group, so people wrote sections.
So, see, and you're probably right. Yeah. So even then, maybe nobody's read the entire thing. Here's another one. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010, 1,000 pages.
Were we told we had to pass it before we could read it?
We had to pass it to see what was in it.
To see what was in it. Yeah.
Which probably goes back to your point that multiple people wrote it, and so no one person read the whole thing. Yeah. So we'll let the lawyers read it later. The Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, which included the COVID-19 relief package, 5,000 pages. 5,000 pages. So not only do we have too many laws, but reading the laws is onerous. Nobody can do it.
You know, several times they've tried having these rules about you have to submit the package 3 days before the vote so that the elected officials could read it and whatnot. And, you know, when we have our public meetings, they're supposed to be announced 2 days ahead of time and all this kind of stuff. And so there are efforts to make that time available to research this stuff. But it never works because they violate those rules and whatnot. They just grow and grow and grow, and I think it's all just word garbage anyway.
There are people out there who can read these, who are paid to read these, attorneys, and they can figure out the ways around them. And
I think they're written to have ways around them.
Yeah.
That's why they have so much verbiage.
Yeah. Going back to what you were talking about earlier, you know, one thing that we're taught often when we take lessons in ethics is that the law should not be confused for right or wrong. It's basically a minimum standard of accepted behavior. But we look to it like it's ethical, and it's not. And we end up with these things that basically they don't guide us to do what's right. They guide us to figure out how to get around them. Right. You know,
that's a really great point. And I think one of the things I look at it is that laws are restrictive. Laws can only prevent things. They can only stop things. They don't create anything. They don't build anything. If you had a law that's built something, that would be slavery of some sort, you know, because they can only take and prevent. So people talk about, oh, this law is going to make a better world. It's not going to make a better world. It may stop a particular behavior or a particular thing that you don't like in the world, but it's not going to make anything. I think people get mixed up with that sometimes.
I like what you're saying there, because this goes back to what I was saying earlier about when we started this country, right? We told you what your rights were. You have the right to move about the country. You have the right to free speech. You have the right to gather with your friends. You have the right to seek prosperity. You have the right to do this, right? And we didn't give you the rights. God gave you the rights. Yeah. And ever since then, we've been saying, well, you have the right to say this, but within this parameter, and you can only say it in this way, and you can only say it in this context within this group. You have the right to property, but on that property, you have to have these number of setbacks, and you can only put X number of buildings on that property. And, you can only enjoy the property in a certain way that we tell you is acceptable. And so we started off on the right foot, and then got wayward somewhere.
Yeah.
We need to start working backwards and eliminating some laws.
I agree.
And the best place to start is with yourself, right? We're all about civility, and civic engagement on this show, and so I always point back to ourselves first and say, again, the next time somebody does something that angers you or upsets you, don't ask for a new law.
Yeah.
It's the wrong direction to go. And those laws that you ask for inevitably come back and bite you in the bottom because they become restrictions against your own personal freedoms.
Right. If you're going to start throwing chains around other people, those chains will come back to you too. Yeah. I'm going to bring up our book for the day. Now, you brought up 2 books already. So
I know. I'm just helping the bookstore out.
Yeah. The one that I brought down today is by Thomas Sowell, and I've mentioned a couple of his books before because I think he's a great writer. And this one's called The Vision of the Anointed. And this is all about the people who think they can think up the right law to make the world a better place. And it's basically about our rulers, and they feel that they know what's best for everybody else. And this book discusses why that's an impossibility.
That would have been a great book recommendation for our last show, too.
I know, but I had the other one, the Julius Caesar book. So we got some good books down there.
Yes,
Come check them out.
Yes, you do.
But I try and be diverse and open-minded, and we have some bad books, too. But I'll leave those for you to discover.
Do you keep those tucked behind the good books? You gotta,
not necessarily. No,
like little Easter eggs people got to go find.
No. I try.
Do you know? Are you aware of how many laws might regulate your bookstore?
I have no idea. If I violate it, they'll come and tell me.
I bet there are probably some rules in the city of Boerne that govern your bookstore.
Yeah, don't tell me about them. I don't want to hear it. I do have a landlord that sometimes will tell me, you should do this or that. And I'll have a fire marshal pop in and say, okay, you need to move this or that. And that happens, and I do what I'm told.
Yeah.
But I don't ask for the chains.
Yeah.
They show up on their own.
Yes, they do. Well, ignorance of law. Remember, no excuse.
I know. I've got an interesting thought on some laws.
All right.
We have laws about self-harm. It's against the law to commit suicide, supposedly.
Right.
I'm not sure exactly what statute that is. And people aren't supposed to do self-harm, and so we try and stop them. And yet, in some places, we have legal assisted suicide. So I'm sort of like, well, which is it? Can you hurt yourself or not?
Yeah.
It's just a thought. We have laws that, to me, contradict themselves.
Yeah.
And I think legally assisted suicide contradicts any kind of law that talks about taking care of yourself in any fashion. People want to pass laws about what kind of soda I get and how big it is and all this stuff. And yet they say, well, if you're really tired of the life, then we'll help end it. I'm like, seriously?
Our new laws banning food dyes and all that, I'm on the fence on those because I know there are certain things that we're putting into our bodies because we abdicate so much, like we had talked about in our show last week. We don't really pay attention to food labels and whatnot.
And that's the problem. I think if everything was labeled clearly and sufficiently, I wouldn't be in favor of the laws. And the food dyes, that's an excellent example. because I don't really know what that stuff on the food label means. If I could read that label and interpret it, I wouldn't need somebody saying, hey, don't use poisonous food dyes.
Right.
And so, yeah, I'm a little bit on the fence like you with that. But I do believe if we could find ways to inform people on whatever aspect of life we're trying to talk about, then we wouldn't need a lot of those laws. We could justify not having them.
Yeah. When I started reading about that, my first thought was, I drink a Big Red soda about once every 2 years. And because I think when I was a kid, I loved them, but now they're just too sweet. But when I want that Big Red soda, if they screw with the red food dye,
it'll be this sort of light brown soda.
Yeah, I'm going to be more than a little upset, right?
Yeah. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you for listening to Ceasefire with Dale and Ron, and we look forward to hearing from you next time, though there's no law about that. But if you missed any of this, you can always go to BoerneRadio.com and listen to it as a podcast anytime, any day, any week. And we'll see you next week.